and welcome back to the Horror Cult Films podcast. I'm David Smith, and in this episode, myself and Mr. Alasdair are delighted to be joined by Greg Sestero. Greg is best known for his role of Mark in The Room, oh hi Mark, and his memoir about making The Room, The Disaster Artist. However, he's also done horror, having worked on the Puppet Master franchise and the Netflix series Bly Manor. Here we talk about his directorial debut, Miracle Valley. It's a cool, chaotic little thriller about a sect, so from cult films to a film about cults. Enjoy, and please note that when Greg called in, he did so from a very busy coffee shop in the States, so you're going to hear some clanging and other cafe sounds in the background. But hey, it's unavoidable. Hello, Greg. It's good to have you here on the Horror Cult Films podcast. We're, of course, talking about the movie Miracle Valley tonight. How did this movie come about?
You know, like you, I love horror films. You know, one of the early ones that I fell in love with was the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. It was terrifying but intriguing, and so I've always been drawn into horror from an early age. And so, I fell in love with the Home Alone franchise. I wrote a screenplay for a Home Alone sequel and went down that route. And then after, making The Room, after writing The Disaster Artist and that movie being made, I thought, horror is a direction that people really get up for. They're excited for it. There's a whole community of people that love horror movies. And I thought this is a great direction for me to go in, because with horror, you can play the comedy, you can play the drama, plays well with the crowd. You can take risks with horror films. So I decided I was going to move to the middle of nowhere and study 70s horror and go out and make a movie that's an homage to that genre. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the John Carpenter films, movies that are, take themselves seriously, but they're living in a totally ridiculous concept. But you're not playing it that way. You're playing it totally serious. So we went out there and we shot this movie just as the pandemic was happening. And it was on location. It was practical effects. And, when we finished making Miracle Valley, I was like hacked. I probably have been broken in half at that point. And I just, again, making horror movies is so much fun. So it's about a cult. And one of the things I've always been fascinated with are those cults that live in the underground that people get into and obsess over. And so it explores, an underground cult in the Arizona desert.
With the way the cult are characterized in this movie, what kind of research did you find yourself doing?
So I studied, the Manson cult, Terror in the Jungle, Jim Jones, and cult leaders that draw people in, that people are willing to get out there and die for these cult leaders and these motives. And so particularly in this film, I came across a cult in near the area I was living in, near Bisbee, Arizona. And it was this cult that, believed in rare blood types and bringing people, finding that ultimate rare blood and trafficking humans for their blood type. So I was like, haven't heard one like this. I wanted to, explore something that really kind of hadn't been done in this way. And so that's what this movie goes after, is the Miracle Valley cult.
Just on the Miracle Valley cult, unfortunately the film, so I won't give any spoilers, but I'll say there's certainly a wooden cross and perhaps a staking scene, like a sort of allegories to vampirism, that style of parasitism, a consuming of other people, their blood and what have you. Was there any inspiration in that area?
Yeah, it was sort of, going into the direction of vampires without ever mentioning vampires. It was almost, living in that sort of that region, but never addressing it that it's that. It's almost, was there a lot of cults believe they're the only cult that does a certain thing, and they have their own name for it. And so that's sort of what I let this story be.
Thinking about yourself as being the writer here, and also, of course, director and star, One big difference between yourself and Tommy Wiseau is it seems like you're quite happy to play a character who's an absolute horse's ass in this one.
Yeah, I didn't expect to be in this movie. I sort of wrote, basically a story about a troubled couple that, whenever there's trouble, there's friction. That's where cult leaders really dive in and try to find that moment to separate people, to get people to join. And so that's what I knew. This couple was troubled, and they were trying to, they were headed to the point of no return. There probably wasn't going to work out, and this trip was there to kind of help them get through it. And the more we played into it, the more I realized this character is just all about this photography and getting a photo of this rare bird, which is totally insane, and thinking that's going to complete his life and solve all of his problems. And, I just kind of leaned into that, because when you're writing, directing, starring, all that stuff, the least thing you're thinking about is your performance. So I just kind of went with it and reacted to what was around me and just let loose and just kind of had fun playing this part.
Alex, it was nice. It reminded you a bit of Midsommar, where I guess what we're seeing with the cult is something that they're able to fulfill for Sarah that she's evidently not getting here out of her boyfriend. And when it came to developing Sarah's character, what was the process there?
So I knew, I've watched many A24 films. I just knew Sarah was somebody who didn't really know what she had. I think just in general as a person. So, she's coming in, she's lost everything. Her mom is sick. She's really doesn't like this guy she's with. She's trying to find a way out, but she's not strong enough. So it's sort of about her journey to realize, like, she was sitting on something that was so powerful and so unique. And I think a lot of us sometimes don't realize that we have a lot more to offer than we do. And so it was sort of her journey, kind of going through that and then understanding and then taking it back. And the whole journey, I won't spoil anything, but the whole journey starts with her, basically her vulnerability, and then turning that into a power that she uses to help others.
Thinking more of best friends here than The Room per se, but it seems like as a writer and performer, you're quite drawn towards quite a kind of chaotic vibe in your movies. Like I was thinking about with this one, how I would summarize the different plot elements to someone that hadn't watched, and you're like, all right, so you've got a mad scientist, you've got this cult, and what ideas excite you?
Best Friends was sort of something that where I was at that point, I was always intrigued of working with Tommy, of having him play a role that really fits him. And at that point, I was very taken with like Breaking Bad and movies like A Simple Plan and Nightcrawler. So I knew I wanted to do something dark in the world of LA. And so I just usually take personal experiences I've gone through that are really weird and chaotic, and I sort of just infuse and invest that into these stories that I'm writing. And so I think with Miracle Valley, it was sort of going in that direction in the same way of taking a location, taking local vibes that have happened and turning and infusing that into this story. And my good friend who plays the priest, Rick Edwards, he plays Father Jake. He's a biker in real life, and we talked about what kind of fun can we have with you playing a cult leader or priest. And so we just both kind of dove in and went that direction. But yeah, no, I'm noticing there's a similar kind of dark, twisted style. One of the things that I try to also do is put some comedy in these films, these moments that, not forcing it, but just moments of comedy that kind of happen. And when we played Miracle Valley with a crowd, there's a ton of laughs, which I thought was pretty funny. A lot of like call outs and people yelling at the screen. I think it's with that, you always want, with the crowd, you always want those moments of comedy.
In that respect, is being associated with The Room, has that created what an expectation audiences would have that, you're the Room guy, so when it comes to watching something like Miracle Valley, that maybe pushes the audience to take it as if this is going to be that sort of movie?
There's definitely going to be that expectation, and there's definitely people that as they're watching it will assume it's intentional or lean into it. But I think with each film, you can honor that, and you can give fans something that they can appreciate. But, as soon as they kind of settle into Miracle Valley, I think they get taken on a different journey. And, it's sort of, up to me as the storyteller and as the director to kind of lead where to take them. I think an audience will follow you if you're giving them something genuine or fun or something different. So when they're sitting in there, the expectation that they've watched for so many years is in that vein. But as first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, I think they get settled in for something different.
Just want to ask about sort of the cult and the research that you would have done into cults and how they operate. And certainly it's been an area of interest of mine as well. Like, how can someone be in that position? It seems that like cults fundamentally find ways to make people act in ways that are outside of their own self-interests. From a starting place, it looks like they would like take, say, someone who's lost or someone who's feeling dispossessed or some sort of like missing, say, hole in the soul or something like that. And I know with the Valley, Miracle Valley, there's like you do have that list of are you feeling lost, and that it looked like this is a series of like points where someone could read that and just one of them can be that where the tentacles of a cult will get in. I just want to ask you about your research into, say, cults, the red flags behind a cult and how to spot one and not be susceptible to their manipulations and exploitations.
Well, I mean, The Room is very much a cult,
I would we say it has a cult following in terms of audience numbers, perhaps? I suppose I would never say I've watched The Room and felt manipulated by it.
Thank God. I would say, it comes into people that are, they have either a hole in their emotions or soul, and that a cult leader can see that and can maybe fill that for a moment and make them feel worth something, and therefore their appreciation towards that feeling or towards that person, then it ups their respect and their need to be believed and their need to be accepted. So they continue to up the ante and do these things to impress that cult leader, to want to be closer. And it's just, you keep building those people. And I think ultimately it's a false sense of identity. And that's where usually things come crashing down. There's a lot of people that I interviewed when it comes to a cult, they didn't know why they wanted to join, or they can't remember what made them join, or what they ultimately believed in. So I think it's really tapping into a hole that's missing in your soul and in your identity that they're able to reach into and find.
With the Father Jake character and seeing him standing up there, I just want to also say brilliant casting on the Father Jake character. He really was a standout performance. There's a sequence he's talking to a crowd and he's talking about, if I touch these people, then they touch other people and their lives are impacted. And a thought that went through my head was just the word infection. And I was wondering if perhaps the recent pandemic in any way had any influence or impact on your writing of this film.
Well, we made it before the pandemic, so it was really weird. We filmed it, and then the pandemic was starting, and then we're working on post-production on the movie, and all of a sudden we're like, sort of weird how there's like parallels of what's happening to what the story is saying. He's like, give me the injection, the blood types, it can heal you, and I'm going like, what the hell? Like, would I like get a DeLorean and go to the future and not realize it? So it was all filmed before the pandemic, which is even weirder. And where we were filming, it was on this really cool ranch that was isolated out in the Arizona desert, where they used to make these old Westerns with like John Wayne. And there's this guy there who was so terrified when he found a bag of blood in the barn that we used as a prop. He thought it was real. And he thought this movie like started the pandemic.
Really? No.
So it's been a weird few years, to say the least. But the whole priest thing was something actually I'd learned. I'd had a friend who had run the head of Opus Dei here in the U.S. And so I listened to some of his sermons, and this is a lot of the things that he had talked about. And we just kind of leaned into that.
I want to ask you a couple of questions about the disaster artist, if I may. I absolutely loved this book, by the way. I reckon it should be required reading for anyone with an interest in independent cinema. However, when it came to reflecting upon this period of your life, the book came out a decade after the film had been made, and I'm wondering, How was it kind of thinking about your life in terms of a character journey and in terms of an arc? Because I understand that you wrote this with the intention of it being later made into a film.
Yeah, so the movie came out in 2003, and it was sort of an LA underground, film thing that people would show up once a month and joke, and it started to grow. And then around 2009, 2010, it just exploded. People were watching it, talking about it, started playing in London every month. And then that's where I thought, people enjoy this movie or are fascinated by this movie. If they knew the story behind the making of this movie, that would be something I think that would be really intriguing to them. And I saw that story even before The Room became something that people knew. I saw that story as a movie like Ed Wood, like Sunset Boulevard, a story that is so wacky to be real but it is. And I think I thought it'd make a really good film. So I started writing the book about the journey of making that movie and moving to LA, my friendship with Tommy. And as I started to put the pieces together, I realized it was way more than what I thought it was originally. And it just turned into something that turned into a nonfiction novel that we sent the publisher. No idea what they were going to expect, because I think they just thought we're going to get a few chapters about the making of The Room. And they got it. And they're like, this could be a movie. And I'm like, I thought I was crazy to think that initially, but then people started to see the story that way. And I would study books that had been turned into movies. And I really thought these characters could make something really, really wacky. So
on the wacky front, something that I really like that you say in the book is that when you and Tommy were first discussing The Room script, you were telling him to lean into the kind of idiosyncrasies of this, that if this film's going to find its audience, it's because of its weirdness. Because I know that Tommy said a bit, has kind of changed his tune a bit afterwards about the intention, but it strikes me as this is something that just couldn't be fake, that this was an entirely serious endeavor for him. And I guess I'm wondering if the way that you kind of see the film yourself has changed over time.
Absolutely. Yeah, The Room came out 20 years ago. And it, to me, obviously we start out making movies. We want stuff that is brilliant, seen as brilliant, Back to the Future, Inception, all these kind of movies that we've studied that are grand with the score and all that. And I think what's amazing about The Room that's changed for me is that 20 years later, people still love it. They still quote it. And it's something that really worked on whatever level it is. And so I've come to appreciate it and say, hey, it probably doesn't have a lot of those things you would want. It's not a movie I'm going to watch or show friends, and be like, hey, check out how good that is. But it's a movie that it really did what it did very well. And that's something to learn from. And like you were saying earlier, lean into whatever story you want to tell. Go for it. Don't judge it, because for people to be drawn to films, what are the movies we're still talking about 10, 20 years later? They're not ones that are average or that are relatable. They're stuff that really, we watch it and we're like, hey, dude, you got to come see this. I think that's the sign of a movie that tells its story.
It's something that I have wondered, how did this film sort of explode the way that it did? And I think that in some way the film, it has a soul. Like the writer, director, Tommy Wiseau, he had something that he wanted to say. And we are living a time, I suppose, certainly of superhero films, where we are in many ways bombarded with movies that are cookie cutter by the numbers. It's like the movie producers are, here's a movie, we made this for you to make money. Whereas there does seem to be a message in The Room. I was wondering if you had any maybe thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when a filmmaker, where he's at in his life, the story he wants to tell. I think there was something definitely profound. The fact that he had waited so many years to finally be in front of the camera, to finally make a movie. I think there was a lot of life, a lot of passion, a lot of emotion that came out with that film. And it's somebody, again, who's, Johnny is a banker who looks like a vampire, but he doesn't see it that way. So he's telling a story that he sees in his mind that we don't see. And sort of that parallel and that awkwardness is very captivating to watch.
Yeah, because I think you describe it as if an alien were to make a melodrama about human relations, something along those lines. That's what The Room would be, and I think that's a huge part of it. We've recently watched one of the videos of you doing the original script at one of the college campus, I think you were on for, where you're doing tours. And what's that been like? Sort of taking almost a theatrical show of The Room.
Really, it's the fans, the people that show up make it so much fun, because the original script, I read that, over 20 years ago. And it's something that's so unique and so insane and so much fun to just share and read out loud with people who have no idea what to expect. And every time, it's the one thing with that original script, it's the most fun about all these things to do, because people get to experience sort of what I went through. So it's kind of a liberating experience in a lot of ways.
I agree with David, and I've also watched the video of the initial reading. One thing I did particularly enjoy about it is that for every sort of one question that gets answered, two more questions are raised and never resolved. And certainly the people you were on stage with, how they sort of dressed up for the role and played into it, it really added to the performance of it. Which is maybe a perfunctory question, but I was just curious about, from that original script to what we saw on screen in the room, how many redrafts or revisions did that go through?
So the original draft didn't have Denny or Chris R. or Mike. It was just sort of 7 main characters that were all in this tight, weird space. So I think when it got turned into a film, it got edited and a lot of things got added that were more, melodramatic and all that. So the original script to me is the raw idea, the raw moment. And there's just something in it that's so amazingly hilarious and powerful in its own way.
And when it came to The Disaster Artist, did you have much direct involvement with the movie?
Yeah, I got to work with the production designer, and all these photos of my life at that time, my outfits. Dave Franco wore my denim jacket in the movie, which was kind of funny. And I got to visit the set and hang with Bryan Cranston and Sharon Stone and watch them recreate these scenes from that time in my life. And it was like expensive therapy.
That must have been absolutely surreal, seeing these two A-list brothers like playing you guys from a period in your life where you were struggling to get by. I suppose it's almost like makes the room become the little movie that could.
Yeah, no, like I said, the room started out with truly no chance to succeed at all, and just over time, it's the beauty of cinema. People connecting with it, people buying in and getting drawn into the world in it, the world around it, and it's just something that it's been incredible. I mean, seeing the movie 20 years later still sell out screens, coming to Scotland. I'm supposed to come to Scotland again in early November, and then I'm supposed to go to Lithuania and Estonia. So just going around the world and seeing people that appreciate this film and this story is mind-blowing.
I guess I was maybe taken from a very Western-centric perspective. I had no idea the room had like a big Lithuanian audience as well, actually. So I take it you guys have been all around the world then with these screenings.
Yeah, I've been to Russia. I've done the film festival in Russia with Best Friends in Miracle Valley last year, and I think it's screened in Japan as well. So it's just something that really, I don't know, it broke through the matrix where people connect to it.
And when it came to getting the director's chair yourself for Miracle Valley, and I know that this has been a bit of a long-term ambition to be directing your own movie. Along the way, what sort of things did you pick up from the directors that you worked with?
I got to work on The Haunting of Bly Manor on Netflix, which was great. I had a cameo in that, and I got to work with Mike Flanagan. And he just talked about utilizing everything you have in your space. A lot of times you can tell a story very simply. You don't need a ton of props. You don't need all that. So he was able to make a few really good movies just with what he had. He edited them and he made everything work and just continue to go. And so I learned a lot from that. Just, utilizing what you have and focus on telling the story.
That's absolutely spot on. So I'm thinking with Mike Flanagan, he did almost the whole film took place in one room with Gerald's Game, and Hush as well, most of the film taking place in just a single location. Now here, your location does a lot for you. That desert is absolutely stunning.
Yeah, that was one of the things I had. I wanted the desert to be a feeling in the story. I wanted it to be a character. And so that's why I spent a lot of time, about a month, driving around and getting all these really great locations and then working them into the script.
Great to contribute to the desert theme. It adds to, I suppose, isolation, which is another sort of tool that cults would use.
Absolutely. Getting people drawn in and feeling comfortable and feeling like they hit the lottery. We're a part of something that's really special, and then they don't want to go back to reality.
Yeah.
And I see your next movie is going to be a UFO. You said earlier with Miracle Valley that you weren't originally planning on playing the part of David in it. Are you going to be just behind the camera on the next one? Are you also going to be up front among the abductees, perhaps?
It's tough to say. This is based on the experience I went through in Arizona making this film. I tend to take weird experiences I've gone through and turn those into movies. So I'm not sure. I might want to try to do something different with this one, but it'll be fun. I've done a lot of research on UFOs, and the title is Forbidden Sky right now, and the guy who played Father Jake, Rick Edwards, is going to be in this movie as well.
That's good to hear.
You've had a few actors that have done some in this one that you've worked with in the past, where you've forming a bit of a relationship with them at the moment, and when it comes to moving forward with a creative team that you're quite familiar with, like have your relationships developed?
Yeah, you start to know people's strengths, and making a movie is such a collaborative experience, and you want to keep those friends together and keep the experience to be enjoyable. And you have no idea a movie's going to come out, but if you have a great crew together, you have a great time. I think it gives it the best chance to make something that people want to see.
I think that's just one last wee question about The Room, because I've always wondered this moment where Tommy's having his breakdown at the end after Lisa decides it's a good idea to call Mark, which I don't know why, when you're all together, and he's doing that thing where he's humping the dress. And I was wondering, like, when it comes to on set, what was the kind of vibe like among other people who were in the room? Were all of you sort of along for the ride? Were you all quite baffled by bits like this?
Yeah, I read the script and I knew like what was in there, and I loved it and I laughed. I never thought he would actually hump the red dress. So
I did not realize that was in the script. I assumed that was improv. Wow.
No, it was in the script, and I was like, "There's no way he's going to carry through and do this." And sure enough, he did it, and nobody understood what was happening. And they're like, "Oh dear God, wait, what? Huh?" That was one of my favorite parts, is that he wrote it and he went and filmed it.
Wow, fair enough. I had absolutely no idea.
The Room has defied expectations from start to finish.
Oh, actually, what was one last thing as well, actually, about the soundtrack for both of these, for both The Room and Miracle Valley. With The Room, I assume that was one of the local bands who was doing the song that was playing over the sex scene where he's shagging the girl's belly button. With regards to Miracle Valley, how did you source the music? Is that artist that you know? There's a really good Doors vibe at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, it's his name is Jimmy Lagnefors. He's a Swedish composer. So we composed the film during the pandemic. So from Sweden, he would go through it and he'd score it. And he really understood the comedy and the weirdness of the movie, and his score is now on Spotify, because this is Spotify. The Miracle Valley soundtrack is now on there. So he was great. He was great to work with, though. Yeah, and the Doors, definitely. I didn't think of that. Now I absolutely get it. That opening is definitely a tribute to that era.
Yeah, because as soon as I'm seeing Desert, I'm hearing, this is like Break on Through to the Other Side at the start.
Yeah.
It's very good.
Good point.
And with The Room, do you know how Tommy sourced the band music for that? Was that just local musicians for him?
It was just local musicians that the editor, I think, knew a manager who reps singers. And these guys didn't know the movie. They just came in and just belted out these songs. And it's like, perfect.
Yeah, because that song, I Will, is an absolute toe tapper.
You got to play it on every first date. It'll make it happen.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and and if you're in Aberdeen, we will be along at your screening.
I'm definitely want to come out there.
Actually, Alasdair, that was the first time you heard of The Room, wasn't it? You went to one of those interactive screenings.
It was at the Belmont Cinema, and it was one of the most lively cinema experiences I've ever had, with spoons flying everywhere and a lot of interaction between the movie and all of the audience.
Yeah, same at Prince Charles. I did the London one a couple of times. I assume, obviously you show up as a guest for a lot of these, but I mean, you must have seen this film literally hundreds of times by now.
Only 7 times. I never watch it.
You just hang at the bar while it's on.
Just get some whiskey, hang out with friends, go for walks, and then come back. And I perfectly timed it. As soon as I show up, the end credits are on. My favorite part.
Thank you very much.
Anytime, guys, and hopefully I'll see you out there very soon.
Thank you. Certainly, yeah.
check out horrorcultfilms.co.uk. Music by White Bat Audio.